Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of the series of our Racism Evolution History to Hope. We are so glad to have you this evening. As you can see, tonight we're going to be doing a historical look and information of our indigenous people. And we're going to be having our speakers, Charlotte Basch from the Historic Education Department with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and Amber Hayward, who's the program director there at the Puyallup Tribe of, Puyallup Tribal Language Program. So we're glad to have you. Please know that this is a series. At the end, we will be putting up a slide that will show all of the upcoming forums that are going to be taking place. I also want to say that this is being presented by and sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Pierce County, Vibrant Schools, and the Tacoma chapter of NAACP. We have worked collaboratively to bring this together, and it's our hope that we give you some insight as to looking at the evolution of racism from a cultural perspective. And again, tonight's speakers are going to be from the Puyallup Tribe, and that is Charlotte Basch and Amber Hayward. And I'm going to turn that over to them at this time.
Thank you, Kimmy. Hat Sachel Twagulapu Charlotte Basch Seedstat Puyallup Tribe Yafti Klatsip Nehalem Uyayished Faltidu Lul Adi Ati Puyallup. Good day, everyone. My name is Charlotte Basch. I am a Puyallup tribal member. I am also Klatsip Nehalem. I work for the Puyallup Tribe in historic preservation, and I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm going to ask my colleague Amber to introduce herself as well. Cynthia, I'm not sure if folks can see me right now.
Little did I know this is going to end up looking like a penguin. No one wants. Amy, could you repeat the ground rules, please, so that everybody understands they're supposed to be muted in every way?
Yes. Yes. Folks, please mute so that our speakers will not have any distractions and everyone can hear very clearly their presentation. Also, we want to operate from an attitude and an environment of respect. So as we go through the process of sharing information, we want to keep that paramount. So please, if you haven't taken the time, please mute yourself at this time. Thank you so much.
Amber, would you like to introduce yourself?
Atlachel Twagwalapu CEAB, Amber Sterud Hayward Seed Stat, Spoyala Pobs Chud Tis Salish, Uyayush Chud Twatis Spoyala Pobs Twal Sali Achi Zaladub, Tuyayush Chud Otis Lela Olubadi, Uyayush Chud Oti Torshot. Good day to each and every one of you. My name is Amber Sterud Hayward, and I am a Puyallup tribal member. On my father's side and on my mother's side, we are from the Salish tribe in Montana. I've worked for the Puyallup Tribe for 20 years, formerly in the Historic Preservation Department and presently as the Language Program Director, trying to revitalize our ancestral language, Torshotsi. It's very good to be here with each and every one of you, and we hope that you guys learn and enjoy some new things today. And as Kimmy was stating, we hope that your hearts are open to hearing new information and new history that has been presented probably quite different to you folks throughout the past years and through your schooling system. So we do definitely ask that you have an open heart and a mind to hear, again, new things. And I think we're going to have some breakout sessions, and at the end, questions and answers. So be thinking about respectful ways to ask questions. We definitely don't speak for all Indians or Native Americans or tribal people. So just definitely, hopefully you can keep that in mind, and hope again that you learn some good stuff today. Puyallup Tribe, I am finished.
Peace quote. Thank you, Amber. I'm going to kind of kick us off, and Amber gave us a really good introduction there. Amber and I, when we were asked to participate in this panel, we spent a lot of time thinking about what really gives us the authority or what stories we have to offer to this panel. And just like Amber said, we want to emphasize that we don't speak for all Indigenous people, all Native people, not even all Puyallup people. You might talk to a Puyallup person who has a completely different understanding or interpretation or experience of our history or of the legacy and history of racism and how it impacts us today. But we want to share a bit of our hearts, where we come from. And we felt like we want to start by talking about tribal history, who our community is, who the Puyallup people are, and then bring in a little bit more on a personal level to some of our own experiences. Oh, there's my face now. I liked just staring at Amber's face. So I'm going to share my screen. We just have a couple slides here to give you something else to look at, but let's see. So you heard Amber and I both speak our traditional language, that is the Lushootseed language spoken by many tribal communities throughout the Puget Sound. In both of our introductions, you heard us say Puyallup Ched. We are Puyallup. We are both Puyallup tribal members. The word Puyallup it literally translates to people from the bend in the river, or people from the river with many bends. This refers to our primary village, one of our main villages that was located near the present day Tacoma Dome. The Puyallup River used to take many bends, but one sharp bend near the mouth of the river before it was straightened by the Army Corps of Engineers. And this is where I like to say one of our metropolitan spaces were. This was a very a buzzing place, a buzzing community for our people. But we also had communities and villages, related villages, all the way at the foothills of Tacoma, of our mountain, now known as Mount Rainier. We had villages that went down the rivers and the creeks and the valleys, all the way to the shores and islands of the Puget Sound. And these communities were very closely related, but they had their own unique relationships to the environments, to the ecosystems that they called home. So we often say we had our upland people, we had the coastal people, we had the plains people, all within our Puyallup family. You'll sometimes hear people say that Puyallup means generous and welcoming, and this is really something that came to us because we are just known for our generous and welcoming behavior. It's not the literal translation of the Lushootseed word, but because of our location in Commencement Bay, what is now known as Commencement Bay, we had many visitors and guests and really strong, healthy relationships with people far and wide. Today, we of course are known as the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and that's where Amber and I both work, and both have grown up in that community. So in talking about the legacy of history, it's kind of, I think it's really important for us to talk about our tribal community that we both were raised a part of and grew up in and informed who we are today. But we have to talk about the pre-contact, where we were, where we have been, where we have lived for centuries since time immemorial, but also kind of the start of where we'd start talking about racism. And that of course is with the introduction or with contact with non-Native people. So some of the earliest records of contact with non-Native people are of course with explorers. George Vancouver, he had an expedition in the Puget Sound in the 1790s. And this, I like to kind of start here when we think about the history of racism, because in Native communities, it's not always as blatant or as obvious, because Native communities have a really unique relationship with the United States, with the formation of the US government and other British government and all of that English government system. So George Vancouver, when he came through, him and Peter Puget renamed many of our places, the places that we had traditional names for. And this, I like to say, or I argue, is one of the first examples of the erasure of our people and of our communities from our homelands. Their erasure and their use of these names would later be used to validate the continual erasure and continued racism of our people. So this is as early as the 1790s. And I have a little bit of a timeline in a minute, but, oh, where does this go? Within, just a few, about 60 years, our people entered into the Medicine Creek Treaty in 1855. And the treaties are really important for us to talk about in any conversation about tribal people, tribal communities, and especially the role of racism in our history as Native people. Because unlike any other minority group, underrepresented group, people of color, community of color, Native American people have a distinct relationship with the United States government that dates back to the settlement of our lands and to the treaty making era. So our people entered into the Medicine Creek Treaty in 1855. There are a lot of things we can talk about in the treaty that it could have its own 2-hour-long presentation, but just a couple of things I want to pull out is that we negotiated with the governor, the territorial governor of that time, Isaac Stevens, who in his own right was a man wearing many conflicting hats that I think really highlight the conflicting approach to tribal relations at that time and demonstrates the interwovenness of racism in policy and interacting with Native people. Isaac Stevens was the territorial governor at that time. He was also the superintendent for the Northern Pacific Railroad Survey. This meant that he was in charge of figuring out how to get the railway system to Washington Territory. This was, of course, we know the role of the railroad system in westward expansion. This was a huge tool used to strengthen the United States government and as a nation. And then his third hat was the superintendent of Indian Affairs. This means that he was the person delegated by the United States president to interact with the Native peoples of Washington Territory. While you could say, oh, well, he was there then to interact with Native people to make sure everything went smoothly, knowing these other hats that he wore, you know that he was coming to interact with our people, to negotiate with our people and create treaties to get rid of us, to move Native people out of the way of this westward expansion. The treaties eventually actually set, oh, next slide. The treaties set up reservations for our people. And again, there's so much we can talk about around the treaties. I strongly encourage you to check out Fort Nisqually's Treaty War panel sessions that have been going on throughout the year. They dive into these a bit more. You can find them on YouTube. But these treaties set up reservations that forced our people onto these plots of land. I'll dive a little bit more into that, but I just wanted to set this part up because there is so much deeply ingrained in policy of Native people in how our communities, how our tribes have interacted with just the US government. This is on a much larger policy level. And there are just some examples of how racism has interacted with US policy, but those US policies have been enacted because of racist individuals. And when those racist individuals enact racist policies, they then in turn feed and empower racist individuals to continue that cycle. So there's a lot here to unpack, and I want to lay out our treaties, our relationship with the US government, and then I want to kind of bring us up to modern day. So we have unpacked a couple examples of our own history where racism has seeded itself in interactions with the Puyallup Tribe, with the US government. But I do want to say that despite the legal relationships despite all the negativity surrounding the treaty, the treaties are exactly what empower Native communities to have this unique relationship with the United States government. And they are what lay out the rights that we have as Native people and are continuing to fight for today. After the Medicine Creek Treaty, it's important to just lay out a couple more examples. Within 30 years, we have a series of allotment acts, which essentially divided up the land that was promised to us in the treaties. It divided the land and gave it to individual landowners, individual Native landowners. This has a lot of, there's a lot tied into the allotment and the separation of our land. One, if you look at the amount of land that non-Native settlers were getting at the time, is often double, if not more, of the amount of land, the amount of acreage that our Native people were receiving at this time. Around this time also, Puyallup people were allowed by the US government to sell their parcels of land on the reservation if they so choose to do so, if they so choose. This again is a huge topic of discussion that we can expand on. But one part of this is if we look at the amount of money that our Native people were receiving for the sale of their land, it was often cents on the dollar. And this is just one example that we see throughout history of the things that our Native people owned, the land, our culture, our language, being viewed as less than that of our non-Native counterparts. This, of course, put our people into a state of poverty, and it just continued this cycle. We keep moving through time. We see time and time again these examples of policies enacted largely by the United States government from this racist lens, this racist approach that disenfranchised our Native people and kept us in these states of poverty and hardship, and the cycle continues. We look at the boarding school system that started in the late 19th century and continued on into the early 20th century. This was a project by the United States government to use the education system to strip us of our culture, of our language, of our traditions, and physically remove our kids from all of that, including from their communities. Again, this is an example of US policy that viewed Native culture, language, tradition as less than and something to be stripped from these kids. And we keep moving through history and we see these things, these generations, every generation seems to have these interactions. And it brings us into the mid 20th century where we hear a lot about the fishing wars. This was a time, a number of decades where our people had to fight for the rights that were promised to them in the Medicine Creek Treaty. Among many things, including our land, we also were promised the right to hunt, fish, gather, and sustain our people on the lands that we have inhabited since time immemorial. In the 1950s, around that time, the mid 20th century, the state of Washington decided that we no longer needed to have access to all of those fish that were promised to us. We no longer needed to use gill nets that our people had fished with since time immemorial. And we no longer had the right to access the fishing grounds that we had accessed for generations. And this was something that the state took into their own hands and decided to enforce. And many of our people, many of our family members, my grandfather was arrested numerous times for simply trying to support his family and to exercise his rights to fish on his traditional fishing grounds. This is another example of where we see the US government or other government systems, such as the state Department of Fish and Wildlife, deciding that the things that Native people are doing, the things that we are exercising, the traditions that we have are less than and need to be controlled, need to be modified. And so we have this history of, if you look at all these things, it's not, there's this history of racism in policy in how our people, our community has interacted with the US government. This is a really, really broad, high level look, and there is no way we can dive into every one of these. And that's part of why I know at some moments I get flustered trying to think of which fact here am I trying to squeeze into this. But we felt that it was really important to have this history and go on these talk about each of these major points in history where we see racism throughout our interactions. I want to bring it in a little bit and talk a little bit closer to home. Amber, I don't know if you have anything here before we, okay. I guess I will stop sharing. So we see, like I said, racism throughout history. And when Amber and I were talking about the best way to approach this, it's taking this huge, huge, huge topic and trying to figure out what we even can say about it. And so we came at it from this legal approach, from this policy approach throughout history. And I want to talk now a little bit more close to home. And when we have talked about this topic, Amber and I, something we've discussed is that, well, we haven't experienced racism like our parents have. We haven't experienced racism like our grandparents did. And this is something that made us feel like, well, are we qualified to talk about this? And we sat with that and both came to this place of thinking about how the stories of our elders, of our family, of our ancestors impact how we live in the world today. And so I'd like to share a story of my mom's that she has given me permission to share. And I want to do justice to her story. And it's a story that has sat with me and came to my mind the second that Kimmy reached out to me to talk about this. My mom was born and raised in Fife on the Puyallup Reservation. She attended the Fife school district throughout her school years. And she has many, many, many stories. Like I said, my grandfather was arrested many times for fishing on the Puyallup River. He was in jail the day that she was born. But one story in particular she has is about a day on the school bus. My mom was born in 1955. This story is sometime in the late 1960s. And she has a story about being on the school bus, going into school, and a young white girl has an apple and she's eating this apple. And she starts playing and chatting with all the kids on the school bus. And she hands the apple to her friend. And her friend takes a bite of this apple. And then that friend passes it on. This is decades before COVID. Now I get the heebie-jeebies, but she passes it on and all the kids take a bite of this apple. And the apple gets to my mom and her sister. And my mom takes a bite of the apple and goes to hand it to the next person. And all the kids stop and look at her in complete disgust. And my mom and her sister are trying to figure out what they did, what's wrong, why did everyone stop playing? And they realized it was because those kids, all of the white kids on the bus, did not want my mom to take a bite of their apple. And they were completely disgusted that my mom, a full-blood Native girl, would take a bite of her apple. And everyone on the bus started getting upset, freaking out, crying. I guess the little girl started crying because her apple was contaminated. And the bus driver pulled the bus over, this is on Valley Highway, pulled the bus over, came back to see what was going on. The kids shared what happened. And the bus driver kicked my 8-year-old mom and 9-year-old cousin off of the bus to walk home because the bus driver was also disgusted that they would even think that they could take a bite of that white girl's apple. And I share this history, this story, this family story of mine, because even though it's not mine, this is a story that I grew up with. These are the experiences that I grew up hearing. And I often think now in my current job where I work with school districts, where I work with organizations, nonprofits, museums, and sometimes I think about those little kids on the school bus and who they grew up to be. And of course we can say that, well, they grew up in the civil rights era and they may have changed and they have different experiences and perspectives now. And that could very well be true. But I often also think about that bus driver and how he said that behavior was okay and empowered that behavior, because of something that he was taught when he was young. And that in turn affected the kids on that school bus. And those kids on that school bus with the belief system they have grew up, and they are running the organizations that Amber and I interact with. They are teaching the students at our local school districts where our Native kids go. They are raising kids that sit in the desks next to our Native kids. And even though we've had, the type of racism has changed, and I am so lucky in my experience in 2020, that 2021, that I don't have those overt face-to-face experiences with racism. I still see the legacy of those experiences and those people today in my day-to-day interactions, and they impact how I engage with them and those individuals and those histories that I hear and those perspectives we hear about tribal history, tribal people. So I share that, and I know that there's a lot in there, and we kind of started really big and brought it really far in. But this is, I just want to share that as we start to transition and talk about how we see racism manifest today and how we see the legacy of racism today in what we do. So Amber and I have both worked, I currently work in historic preservation, Amber used to, and now works in the language department. And in 2020, as many of you all know, we saw this groundswell of interest in social justice, in racial justice. And there are a lot of pros and cons to that. It's been really exciting to see that change. But we are also still seeing the legacy of racism, even in well-meaning people who have well-meaning intentions and well-meaning requests. And so Amber and I have put a lot of energy, and we know that a lot of our other communities of color, individuals of color, have had to put a lot of energy in the last 2 years to educating people on the basics of how to be anti-racist, how to be good allies, how to dabble in this world now of post-2020 in a good, meaningful way. And I kind of want to hand it over to Amber to talk a little bit about the changes that we are seeing, but also how we are hoping people are making those changes and some of examples of that. That's a lot, Amber, sorry.
Yeah, and Charlotte, I just want to chime in to say thank you for your truth. And I think that's what we're trying to do with these forums is having the voices, the true voices, the authentic voices, and the stories that clearly demonstrate the kinds of history that have happened with Indigenous people in this area, specifically with the Puyallup Tribe. So I thank you for your courage. I thank you for the information, and I hope those that are listening can understand and have an idea of what the truth is when we talk about the evolution of racism, Indigenous people here in the greater Puget Sound area. So I just wanted to offer thank you. And Amber, we're looking forward to bringing you on board, and please come forward.
Thank you, Kimmy. And Kimmy, am I correct in saying at about 7:45 is when the breakout groups will begin? Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty close, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
So we've got about 15 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that check.
All right, so Charlotte did an amazing job of squeezing so much history and information, sharing her mom's firsthand experience, which I'm sure is just one little page in a whole book full of racist things that her mother has experienced. And so I really am grateful for her mother allowing Charlotte to share that, because the work that we do, we're trying to narrow the focus in on Puyallup and not broadening these very general terms. Oh, Native Americans are treated badly in the United States. That's very, you can dismiss that really quickly. But when we try to bring it in and narrow it in to say, no, this happened here in Tacoma, this happened here in Fife, this happened here in Puyallup, it really helps, I think, people to focus in and really say that this indeed does happen here and it has happened here. And so I just am really grateful for Charlotte, you know, again, just giving that really great, concise information out there. I felt like it was really important to talk about like our inherent ways of life that we lived here in Puyallup and in this Coast Salish area, of the things that we thought were important for our community. It's communal living and communal contribution. We spoke multiple languages. We learned multiple cultures. And then upon assimilation, it was the complete opposite of everything that we knew. Everything was tried to be stripped away from us, and all of the things that were tried, all of the things they tried to take away from us, the whites were still like incredibly fascinated with and wanted it. And so I feel like that's important to bring up as well. They took our language, they took our children, they took our culture and our beliefs. And today, the stuff that Charlotte and I see is non-natives trying to come to us to get all of that right now. They want our language. Can we take your language classes? Can we speak your language? Yeah, you can absolutely use the resources we have online, you know, but we have to focus on our own people because it was taken away from our own people. So let us focus on our people. They took our children away. They're still taking our children away. Our children are in all kinds of foster care systems, and non-natives want to adopt our babies. They want our culture. They want our religion. They want our medicines. You know, they're knocking on the door. They want all of it. I heard this phrase, they love our culture, they don't love us. And I'm also part Black, and you can say that for the Black community as well. They love our culture, they don't love us. And so that's the world that we live in today. And so Charlotte mentioned also that we have to work in non-native groups. A lot of times in historic preservation, it's sharing the education, or we're educating folks on the history of the Puyallup tribe, and that's predominantly in non-native circles. And it got to the point where, you know, I worked there for about 8 years. Got so bad with, we could write down, we can predict what the non-native groups were going to ask us. So when I came and opened up and I said, please be respectful of the questions. Please think about those questions before you ask them. There's a reason for that. There's many disrespectful questions that come out. There's many ignorant questions that people have and generalize, so much that we started writing all of these things down in a book. And we would laugh about it. And it's really sad that we have to laugh about racist encounters that we had almost on a daily basis. And it's right here in the Tacoma School District, Puyallup School District, Gig Harbor School District. And we could literally predict it, and it would happen almost every single time till it got to a point where I had to send letters and emails out to anybody we were going to see, and say, please go do some research. Please watch this or read this about the Puyallup tribe before we even get there. You know, we are not gonna manage your classroom or your people in your group. So please make sure everybody is being respectful. There is such thing as a dumb question. There is such thing as an ignorant question. The predominant things that were continuously at the top of the list and still are today. They still are today. Why are you guys drunks and on drugs? Why do you guys have casinos? Do you guys get money? Oh, I'm Cherokee, so I can say whatever I want. I found a picture of somebody in my attic, and I'm pretty sure they were, you know, Cherokee or Blackfoot or Blackfeet. And so these are things that people don't understand, are again leading with ignorance. There's ways to, oh, I've heard you guys, you're chanting. What are you chanting about? What is your costumes? And so if you don't know about a person, there's absolutely a way that you can ask a question if you don't know. So instead of saying, you know, oh, your costumes are lovely, how about you ask, you know, what is it that you're wearing, and what is the significance of what you're wearing, instead of putting your own ignorance into a question. And so those are things that we've come very accustomed to answering. We have responses for them very quickly because we get asked them so often. The other thing that we get often in our present day lives is we ask people to go do their research. And then we get groups of people who do so much research, and then they come and tell us about ourselves. Amber, did you know that the Puyallup tribe, did you know that your people do this and do that? Did you know that your ancestors did da 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 da? Did you know that your ancestors had a village site named, you know, whatever? That also is pretty hard for Charlotte and I to have to navigate through. You're not allowing us to share our experiences with you. You're ready to tell us everything you know and that you've researched. And so again, while people feel like they're doing their research and you know, they feel like they're doing the good work, just sitting and listening to somebody telling them about themselves is so much better and so much more open, and allowing us the space to share our own stories. And so during this quarantine, when George Floyd was murdered, again, we had a huge influx of people looking for more information and more knowledge. And I worked formerly in a historic preservation department. And I would read the documents, the newspapers, and all of the archival material that was in our office. And wow, I would have to say like 85–90% of it is racist. There are racist things all throughout it because it's not written by our own people. It's written by non-natives who either interviewed a native or they felt they were so qualified to write about our people that they just went ahead and did that. And so during this quarantine, I was like, we have to tell our own story. How are people to search and find information about the Puyallup tribe if we're not telling our own stories? And so hopefully at the end here, we can put some links into the chat of work that Charlotte has done, work that I've put together for the Puyallup Tribal Language Program on the Indian boarding schools. We put together curriculum to help folks to get the correct information that comes from our people. And so that's what I do have to say about the modern day racism that we have to endure, and that racism that gets passed through the school systems. That's where our children get that introduction into racism is through the public school system and school systems. And then it gets into the prison systems and the media depiction that is constantly there. Things are getting better for sure, but you know, it's stuff we have to deal with every day. We have about 5 minutes left, and I definitely wanted to talk about during this quarantine time where we had folks reaching out to us and again, wanting to know what they could do to help. How can they support? What information can they read? We were able to, we got so many requests for land acknowledgements. I said, I cannot take another land acknowledgement request. I'm writing out a video script. Charlotte, get in here, talk some Tolshotsi. We're gonna go to these very iconic Puyallup locations and write a beautiful land acknowledgement. I think we're up to like 9,000 views on it already. So it's being used, it's being watched. And so that's the type of stuff that we're happy to share. We don't have to be at every single meeting that you have. You can just show this video. That's one thing that folks can do. Other things are people reached out to us to do like news stories on us during the quarantine and newspaper articles. And there was a local Tacoma magazine that reached out and asked if they could write an article about Tolshutsi, our ancestral language. And I said, this is all well and good. But then what happens after this article when people forget it as soon as they read it? You know, is there a page in your magazine that stays the same every single issue? And they said, yes, our mission statement stays the same every time. I said, are you willing to put that in Lashutsi and keep that in all of your magazines? And they said, absolutely, we will absolutely do that. And I said, you're using your position of power and your influence to elevate the Puyallup tribe, our culture, our history, and our language, and the people who are living today. So that's an example of a person taking what they have, the power that they have to do. We can't change the world, we can't change the United States, but you have the ability to do something in your own circle, whether that's in your own home with your own children. If you are a school teacher, that is with your children in your classrooms. If you are in government, that is with the people that you work with. So there's many ways that we can use that influence that we have. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you can talk to your kids about it. You don't have to have some huge, big, powerful, prominent job to push forward and elevate, the local people. People have, again, an influx of, okay, I can't do anything, but can I donate money? Yes, you can. And please do. Please do. There's a lot of stuff that we would love to do that can serve the community. The other thing is, if you are at your job, and another example is one of the school districts that is here reached out to us and said, hey, we saw that you guys have all these cool Lachute Seed yard signs. Can we get some? And I said, you can have a couple, but I need you to buy some. You guys have money. You guys get money for Native kids. I need you to buy stuff. So they said, absolutely, we absolutely have money. And they purchased posters and yard signs. And then again, they went a step further. They are printing Lachute Seed plaques for the front of all of their schools in their school district. Again, every day those kids are going to see that Lachute Seed going into their school. And so we have, these really wonderful things, these call to action that people can do and support us in. And we're just really grateful for that. We're grateful for people like all of you folks here. You are here to learn. You are here to support. And I would imagine you are here to uplift the experiences that Charlotte and I are sharing. We definitely don't speak for the entire Puyallup tribe. We don't speak for all Native people. These are just experiences that we've had personally. And so again, I'm just really grateful to be here and for each and every one of you that took time out today to be with us. And so with that, I will stop talking, and Kimmy.
And thank you. And I think this is a clear demonstration of the theme of our forums is history to hope. And certainly Charlotte laid out a very comprehensive history backed up by Amber talking about similar kinds of things that aligned with her, but then again gave us a sense of hope and what can you do? And then an individual can make a difference. We don't need to wait for a movement. Individuals can make that difference. And if you will check the chat, there is some information about the video that Amber referred to, so that's a resource that both Charlotte and Amber are willing to share with you. And again, I want to thank Amber for her truth, her courage to give her voice. And I encourage all of us who have the opportunity to hear both Charlotte and Amber to take it into the spirit of knowing what is true. What is the historical? What is the hope that comes from this opportunity for sharing? We're going to take this opportunity now to put you into breakout groups. We'll ask that you stay audio and video muted till you get into your breakout groups. And we're going to be guiding you through some of the discussion questions that you might want to utilize for some meaningful, intentional dialogue. And I believe Cynthia, who's doing a lot of our technical, will make sure that those questions are in the chat room so you can refer back to them. But again, I want to stress this is an opportunity to be respectful, to be careful, and what's the word I want? Careful and cautious listeners and speakers, especially from what Amber just shared. Think about your question before you ask it. And is it in the tone of the true spirit of seeking information? Are you speaking on behalf of our speakers, or are you responding to speakers, if you know what I mean? So the question that you may be asking is, you're seeking more information, but you're not giving the kind of questions that you already decided that you've got the answer formulated because you think now you have the answer for the speaker. So let's just be cognizant of that as we go along in the breakout groups. Also, I want to remind you that toward the end of the presentation tonight, we're going to have an opportunity to do some follow-up, take a look at what's next. And we encourage you to stay with us through the whole series as we go through other cultural groups. We hope that you become that individual that can make a difference. And if you represent an organization that can take it to that collective and collaborative effort, we certainly encourage you to do that. But right now, we're going to go ahead and get you in your breakout groups. Again, look in the chat room. We'll be putting the questions in there just to give you an opportunity to have some meaningful dialogue. You'll see something about reflections. What are your thoughts about the information presented this evening? Application. Since policies and practices are either exacerbating, perpetuating, mitigating, or eliminating inequities, name a policy or practice you would like to impact for racial equity. And then action. What are the action steps? What should be taken to make the changes needed for policy or practice to be equitable? And then what's next? What would you suggest we offer as our next steps as a follow-up? So those are the kinds of things we'd like you to have a rich, reflective dialogue in your breakout groups, and then we'll come back